Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming to join me for this full moon, which will happen in around about 25 minutes or so. Now, I'm going to carry on in this session with a theme that I dealt with in the previous session. Now, this particular theme is it's serpentine symbolism in Christianity. Now, I focused very much on the ascending serpent, or Christ as the ascending serpent, in the previous session, and I'll carry on with a bit of that in this session, though also something about the descending serpent as well. This is an Ethiopian Orthodox icon showing a monk called Abuna Aragawi, or Abba Father Aragawi, finding his way to the top of a mountain. In the top left, you can see St. Michael. Now, I'll talk about St. Michael shortly, but in the bottom left, first you see Abba Aragawi pointing towards this mountain. And the brown area here is essentially a vertical cliff face. And then you have the grass at the top, because it's one of those mountains, I suppose, like a table mountain. Now, Abba Aragawi, he wants to get to the top of this mountain. And so he prays, and then a serpent appears, and the serpent carries him up in his coils. Now, having said that, St. Michael stands by to make sure that Abba Aragawi doesn't get bitten by the serpent. So there is this potential danger, I suppose you could say, with the serpent, but it's also through the serpent that he ascends the mountain. Now, this really is the symbolism that you see with the serpent in many traditions. The serpent is really, I suppose, associated with the movement between different levels. So you have an ascending movement and also a descending movement. Now here is this mountain. It's actually got the oldest monastery in Ethiopia on it. It's known as Debre Damo. It's a few hours walk from a small village. I went there in the mid-90s. I did a lot of traveling around various different religious regions in the mid-90s. And yeah, it took about 2 or 3 hours to walk from the local village up in the highlands. Very amazing landscape, as you can see. Now, I think, as far as I can remember, this is where you enter. Now, you enter by climbing a serpent, or what happened is that the serpent eventually turned into a rope, which is what you now use to get into the monastery. Now, I have to admit, when I climbed this rope, I did have a safety harness on, and they sort of semi-pull you up while you also climb. So I don't know if I'd have had the strength to make it up on my own. But it's still open. Like I said, it's the oldest monastery in Ethiopia. Well worth a visit. Ethiopia generally is very much worth a visit. An amazing place. So as I was saying a minute or two ago, serpent often has this dual symbolism of something that ascends as well as something that descends. And I was talking in the last session about this crozier, which is a crozier that's on display in the cathedral here in the city of Wells. It belonged to Bishop Jocelyn, about whom there's a local dragon legend in a small village called Worminster. It has worm in the name, and that often is where you have a local dragon legend, as worm is the Anglo-Saxon for sort of serpent or dragon. And in this particular crozier, I was describing in the last session how a crozier is essentially a symbol of an ascending serpent. Now, this is very clear when you see some of the Orthodox croziers that are actually serpentine in their appearance, as well as having a cross in the middle, because that's what crozier means. It relates to crucifer, the one who carries the cross. But also with the shepherd's crook croziers, such as this one here, you often see a serpentine form or perhaps a face on the end of the shepherd's crook when you look at the medieval croziers. Now, interestingly, this crozier here at Wells, it could be said to have both an ascending serpent aspect to it, which is that whole serpentine form that makes the shepherd's crook shape. But also it has the descending serpent on it, because those figures that you see there is St. Michael engaged in the war in heaven against Lucifer. And Lucifer is depicted as the dragon, or a serpentine dragon. And so you have both the descending serpent, but then you have the ascending serpent, which you could say counteracts that which has descended. This is part of that symbolism of Lucifer, the fallen angel, and Christ, in the sense that Lucifer is the one who falls and Christ is the one who ascends. Now, I thought I'd also bring in another aspect of this symbolism, a more directly cosmological aspect, and that is to do with the planet Venus in relation to this symbolism of ascent and descent. And interestingly, both Lucifer, the fallen angel, and Christ are associated with the planet Venus. Christ describes himself as the bright morning star, which is really a symbol of the resurrection and the ascension. Whereas with Lucifer, Lucifer is the Roman name for the planet Venus as the morning star. He does things in the other order. He first raises himself egoically, and as a result of that, he then falls down. So you have this symbolism of ascending and descending, because Venus rises as the morning star, and so you could say that is ascension, but then Venus also descends or sets as the evening star. So just before the sun rises, you can see Venus as the morning star at certain points in the year, and just after the sun has set, you see Venus sometimes as the evening star. Now, with Christ and Lucifer, the fallen angel, there's a sort of dual oppositional symbolism, whereby Lucifer first raises himself, and then, as a result of that, falls to the lowest point, the center of the earth, whereas Christ does it in the other order. He voluntarily goes down to bring up all that's dead and fallen within the soul, and then he rises as the morning star who never sets, the one morning star who never sets. That's the description of the risen Christ in the Exultet. Now, if we apply this idea of Venus's upward and downwards movements in relation to the image that you see of the crucifixion, where you have the sun on one side and the moon on the other. In the last session, I showed how this is, again, a very common theme in various different traditions, where you have some kind of vertical symbolism of ascent with the sun on one side and the moon on the other. I won't go into any more detail of the other examples of that, but if you watch episode 15, the previous one, you'll see some of those. Now, the interesting thing, of course, if we're talking about the sun, which is, of course, associated with daytime, and the moon associated with nighttime, so you could say that the meeting of night and day are that middle path, that vertical axis of the cross. And of course, the meeting of night and day is twilight, and that is exactly when Venus is visible, either ascending as the morning star or descending as the evening star. Twilight is essentially what happens once the sun goes below the horizon. So you still have the light of the sun, but you're beginning to get the darkness of the night. So it's this threshold time, this place that's in between one and the other. So it is this time when Venus is present as the planet who is rising or setting. Now, another sort of dual opposition that you get with crucifixion symbolism is of the two figures who are sometimes called Dismas and Gestas. They're the penitent and impenitent thieves, one crucified on either side of Christ. Now, you could look upon them as two different, I suppose, aspects or directions of the soul. So one that is impenitent, and so it's destined to go down into the underworld, I suppose, to learn, and the other potential within the soul, which is penitent, and so its movement will inevitably be one of return back upwards. Now, another part of this symbolism is of the two trees in the Garden of Eden, which can be said to be sort of symbolized by the three crosses. In the middle of the garden were the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So these two renowned trees, they're both in the middle of the Garden of Eden, and they're sometimes looked upon as being, I suppose, two different aspects of the one tree. Now, the way to look upon it, the tree of life is the one that leads to eternal life. So that could be looked upon as, I suppose, a singular path of ascent, whereas the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that relates to duality and therefore a descent from one down into duality or multiplicity. So one is an upward movement and one is a downward movement. Now, with that in mind, there is this tradition going back a long way that looks upon Christ's cross as being made of the wood from the tree of life. And so you could then say that on either side of him, there is that duality, which is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the suffering of the earthly world in a certain sense. And obviously there's suffering of the earthly world associated with Christ's crucifixion as well. But in this particular symbolism, the cross of Christ is the tree of life. Now, having said that, sometimes the crucifixion is also associated with the tree of knowledge of good and evil as well. And that's where there's more of an emphasis upon the suffering aspect of the crucifixion rather than the eventual exaltation. And this, of course, has its own serpent, which is associated with the downward movement. You've got Lucifer, the fallen angel, and you also have the serpent in the garden, which are both associated with a fall. And they're often, the two stories are often interconnected or talked about in a similar vein. Now, another point that I made in the previous session, I really want to emphasize, because it's an important seasonal point that doesn't seem to come up in modern Christianity, which I mean, I assume it's intentional, but just it's something that's been forgotten about, because it's a very clear seasonal symbolism in relation to the two serpent storylines, the ascending serpent and the descending serpent. And that's their association with the equinoxes. So Easter, which of course is associated with Christ as the ascending serpent through the resurrection. Easter is the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. So it has this spring equinoctial symbolism to it. Whereas Michaelmas was essentially the autumn equinox in the medieval era. It's about a week after the equinox, but it was the legal day with that fourfold division of the year. That was the autumn equinoctial day, and that's where you have the descending serpent, because Michaelmas is when you have the story of the war in heaven with St. Michael, as I mentioned a bit earlier. Now, I'll show you the biblical quote of this description of the war in heaven with St. Michael, the archangel. It's in the book of Revelation, and this is just two of the verses. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Now, interestingly, there is actually a depiction of Lucifer and some fallen angels in the nave at Wells Cathedral. I've got various talks on my YouTube channel that cover that. And of course, it's in my book, The Cosmos in Stone, which talks all about the cosmological symbolism within this first English Gothic cathedral here in Wells. Now, another theme that I'm going to mention here, because I'm going to be running a course which covers some of this. It's an early story known as the Testament of Solomon. Now, it involves St. Michael and St. Michael giving a ring to King Solomon that has a seal on it. And it's a geometric shape, which is this seal of Solomon. It's actually a pentagram on a ring. And this is what Solomon uses to subdue demons, whom he then gets to build his temple in Jerusalem. It's a fascinating story. Now, here's a line from it, but thou must wear this seal of God. and this engraving of the seal of the ring sent thee is a pentagram. Now, there's so much symbolism involved with this, and of course it involves the planet Venus, which the pentagram very often does. And I'm going to go into it in a course this coming Michaelmas. So that's around the weekend of Michaelmas. It'll be from the 27th to the 29th of September this year. Now, this is going to be the first of a series of courses I'm going to run here in Wales. So this is the first one I'm now beginning to talk about more directly. Now, you can contact me on this email address. I'm also going to put a flyer out on my mailing list, so that'll have more details as well. Now, what we're going to do on this course, we're going to study the symbolism of the pentagram and also draw various of the pentagram geometries which are used in the design of Wales Cathedral. And this links in really with the Temple of Solomon. Now, as for arts and crafts, we're also going to make a piece of parquetry, so wood veneer work, in which we'll do an image of the shield of the character Sir Gawain. He has a red shield with a golden pentagram on it, and he describes it as a sign that Solomon settled on some while back. So it's very specifically this Solomonic pentagram from the Testament of Solomon that Sir Gawain has on his shield. So bit of a computer graphic image you're seeing here. Obviously, it's going to be a wooden image that you'll be making if you come on the course. Now, we'll also draw, construct, and walk a labyrinth for Michaelmas. And of course, a Michaelmas labyrinth is a descent into the dark half of the year, you could say, because it's the autumn equinox. And then at the very end of the course, Rupert Sheldrake, who owns some land locally, he actually owns some land where the dragon legend locally is based. He's going to have an event for Michaelmas in a local village called Dinder. So we'll go to that to end the course. So if you want to come on a course like that, do feel free to get in touch with me. It'll be down here in the southwest of England in the city of Wells. Right, let's draw. Now, I'm going to do something, a variation on what I did in the previous session. In the previous session, I did a sort of dual serpentine image, but I did 7 of these interconnecting, I suppose, spirals in a straight line. So this time I'm going to do 8 in a circle. Right, I shall spotlight myself for everyone. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining me in this session. Right, I shall get my drawing camera set up. Right, we're going to use a bit of A4 paper. As you can see, I've got a piece of A3 here. This is just something I need for my camera setting because it affects the light on my camera if I only have a single piece of paper like this. It makes the camera a bit too bright. So I'm only actually working on a piece of A4. And as you can see, I've got the A4 in a portrait orientation. I'll offset this piece of A4 just a bit so you can sort of see it distinguished from the A3 there at the bottom. Now I'm going to just get the midpoint of the page. You can probably judge with your own eye, you know, roughly the middle between the top and the bottom. But I'm going to use my ruler to find the midpoint. We're not going to go too close to the edges, but right, so I'll put a dot into the middle of the page. And I'm going to set my compasses to 3 inches. Now we're going to do some compasses geometry. To those of you who do geometry, you'll find this very familiar. It's a very, very familiar diagram that we're going to do as a constructional diagram. And then we're going to put 8 holes through the paper. So you'll need to have a piece of paper that's also blank on the other side, because we're going to do the actual diagram on the opposite side of the paper. And we'll just do the construction on this side. So 3-inch radius, draw a circle in the middle of the paper. Oh, I feel a great sense of relaxation every time I draw a circle. Everything just comes down to earth. It's marvelous. Right, as you can see, I'm drawing a horizontal line that goes through the center of the circle. Now take the compasses and place it into, well, what I'm going to describe here as the eastern point of the circle, and we'll draw a semicircle. Now this semicircle will need to be a whole semicircle, so you need to begin it directly below where the point of the compasses is in the page and end it directly above. Now I'm going to do the equivalent move from the western point of the circle. Now I'll be using these 2 intersections here to make a small bisector cross above, directly above the top of the circle. And as above, so below. Now, when you put this line in from the middle of this cross to the middle of this cross, you should hopefully go through the center of the circle. Now, 2 more semicircles need to go in, one from the north and one from the south, orientated differently, so they create these petals like so. Now, if you haven't drawn complete semicircles when you did these 2, you'll find out at this point, because you do need to have the tips of the petals. So if you haven't quite got these petal tips, you might need to go back to here and here and extend these so that they become complete semicircles. Now, this is just such a significant diagram, this one here. You can divide the circle up from this in so many different ways. Already what we have here is the division of the circle into 12. So the distance from here to here is the same as the distance from here to here and here to here, and so on. But what we're going to do is divide up into 8, and we're going to do that by, I mean, as you can see, we've got the fourfold division like so. So if we put lines between the tips of the petals, then we can divide the circle up into 8. So that's what we want to do for this particular diagram. Right, we're going to locate 8 particular points. And properly speaking, we only really need to put in 1 square to find them. I think we'll probably put in 2 squares just to sort of confirm points. So you see how this square that I'm putting in, I'm using the divisions of the outer circle that we just produced by putting in these diagonal lines. So these 4 points here in the middle of the petals. Now this sort of gives us what we need really, but just for various reasons, it sort of can be useful to put in another equivalent square. Now the points that we need are where this square that we've just drawn in crosses the petals. So here, 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 and so on. And these points are all equidistant. Like if you could draw an octagon like that. I think just to be sure, and it is just quite a nice thing to do anyway, I'm also going to use north, south, east, and west to draw a diagonal square. And you should hopefully find that this square goes through those points. So just in terms of fine tuning, it can just sometimes be useful to have this square as well. Because there's always a very slight organic imperfection in our drawing. So just having as many points of confirmation as possible can be useful. Now, hopefully you should find that the overlapping of these 2 squares, the passive square, as we would call it, and the dynamic square, you should find that the overlapping of those 2 squares coincides with the petal lines as well. Right, we'll put one more small line in. I'm going to put my ruler so it's going through the center of the diagram and going through this point here. And I'm going to then just draw a single line like so. And we're going to use that to give ourselves a radial measurement for the diagram. So lining up with the center and this point here, and then just drawing this line. And this, like I say, is going to be a radial distance that we're going to use. Now, before we turn over, we need to actually put pinprick holes with the compasses through the paper so that we can draw on the other side. This is the construction that I suppose is giving us the underlying laying out of what's going to then be the final pattern on the other side. So as I said, it's where the two squares that we've drawn, where they overlap one another, each time it should coincide with the curved lines that form the petals. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's where we need the pinprick holes. Just you don't need to do what I'm doing here. I'm just highlighting these points just in case you sort of want to really emphasize them in your focus. So these are the 8 points. So when you turn your paper over, you should just find 8 equally distributed holes on the other side. But having said that, before you turn your paper over, we need to take this radial measurement here onto our compasses. Now do be fussy about, make sure that you've got exactly the right measure here, because when we do this diagram on the other side, if you're a bit off, it just makes things not quite so satisfying. You do have to be a bit fiddly about your accuracy. So we might as well just be really sure. So make sure this is the point of your compass is exactly in that hole, and make sure that you've got your pencil lead right in the middle of your line there. Right, so turn over and locate those 8 pinprick holes. Obviously, I doubt you'll be able to see them yet, but I'm now going to use this radial measurement to draw a heavy circle. So this will be final line. Once we've done all of these, we are going to then do softer lines, which will just be constructional lines. But these first ones that we do need to be heavy final lines. Well, as you can see, I'm just doing a bit of checking of my diagram. Now, what we need to do with the next part is to increase the radial measurement on the compasses so that from each center we can be tangenting the circles that are on either side of it. Now, this is where the accuracy thing becomes an issue. So if it's slightly inaccurate, don't worry too much. But I'm now going to draw softer lines like so. Now, the reason why these are softer lines is because they're construction lines rather than final lines, but most of them are going to actually end up as final lines. Now, I'll say something now, which might not immediately mean anything, but once you start working, you'll see what I mean. We're going to be working with what could be called rotational symmetry here rather than radial symmetry. Now, as we start drawing, you'll get a sense of what I mean, because I'm going to describe how you draw each repeating section, but it's sort of, you orientate yourselves differently as you go around each circle. So you'll see what I mean once you start drawing it. Now, I'll begin with this circle here. Now, let me draw it first, and then I'll describe what I've done. Right, so you see how I started? I mean, I haven't, if I was going to be really precise about it, I could put a line here that runs between this center and this center, and then I'd know where to begin this line from. But do it by eye. We don't have to have the construction line in. You can probably just begin from tangenting this circle and going all the way around. And then you see when you reach this circumference of this circle, you stop. Now, this is how we're going to get the interweave of the two serpentine forms. So I suppose what I've done is gone from the center to the right of the center and then started from there, from tangenting this circle, but stopping at that circle. That's perhaps the way to describe it, because we're going to be looking at it from a different angle each time we go through this process. So now I'm going to go to the right, as it were, and begin from here and stop when I reach. So as you can see, you've got this full circle here, which leads off and then stops. Full circle here, which leads off, stops. Now keep following that all the way around. So that's the outer part done. Now we just need to do this inner area here, and it's a very similar thing that happens. But this time, rather than, I suppose we went to the right to this full circle here, this time I'm going to go to the left to this circle. And I suppose well, it's a similar sort of inverse thing. Beginning from there and stopping when you reach the next door circle. So slightly shorter lines, obviously, this time, but following a similar principle. And then you start to really find that interweaving serpentine movement. Funnily enough, it's funny I'm drawing this diagram at the moment because there's something that's just come up, which I saw yesterday, where a photo has been found of a mural that John Michel painted in Glastonbury in 1967, which has this sort of interweaving serpentine movement about it. So it's rather nice synchronicity because I do quite a lot with a particular aspect of John Michel's work, as you'll be aware if you've seen my book. John Michel was a good friend of my geometry teacher, Professor Keith Critchlow. Oh, I might have been talking too much there and made a mistake. I think I have actually. I'll correct that shortly. Now you don't have to do what I'm doing here. I'm just rubbing out the construction line so that you get a real strong sense of the weave. Obviously, if you were going to color something like this sort of pattern you see very much so in Cosmati work, those amazing geometric tilings that are particularly in Italian churches. But of course, we have one in Westminster Abbey where the coronation, well, on which the coronation took place last year, Cosmati pavement. That my next book project, in fact, I'm going to do 3 short books about the Cosmati pavement and their patterns. Something that's quite a nice exercise is to focus on what are essentially the 2 forms here that are interweaving. And then you get a whole sense of something very different, or something a lot more cruciform, because obviously this feels very circular and flowing when you have the 8. Okay, everyone, just to finish off, I'll give you a reminder again about that course that is going to be running here at Michaelmas, here in the city of Wales. Do come and join me. Another course which is going to be here in Wales in a couple of weeks' time is this one about the tetractys. This is a form that my geometry teacher, Professor Keith Critchlow, talked about a great deal. So myself and two of my colleagues who also studied with Keith, Daniel Doherty and Adam Tetlow, the three of us are going to spend a Friday and a Saturday and a Sunday going into various aspects of its symbolism. And the reason why we're doing it here in Wales is because there are these 5 tetractys-shaped windows in the Lady Chapel up at the east end of the cathedral. And as you can see in this image on the right, all these angels are all looking up to the one. Okay, now I've checked if the day is right this time. That's the second time I've got the day of the week wrong when I've said about my next session. So this next one is definitely on Thursday, the 6th of June for the new moon at 1:30 p.m. So a reasonable time again for this time zone. Do join me, and I will hopefully see you then. Say goodbye.
Thanks, Tom.
Goodbye.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks for
Tom.
coming to this one, and do come again to the next one.
Thank you,
Have a
Tom.
good day.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See all of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
you so much.
Bye.
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 Bye.